Impact 2025. Poznań. Ze Studia Rzeczpospolitej wita Państwa Marcin Piasecki. Jest ze mną gość, pani Natalia Lechmanova, Chief Economist Europe, Mastercard Economics Institute. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And what is your forecast? What are the GDP growth forecast for Poland in the coming years? What is your opinion?
Well, a lot is happening in the world. Obviously, like all the economies, we have also revised our forecast for, just as we did for any economy around the world, lower on the back of the tariff situation. But Poland, as usual, comes up on top, relatively speaking, in the world pecking order and even in the pecking order of the European economies for various reasons. It's a very well-balanced economy. The recovery is has been very broad-based since the pandemic, driven both by domestic demand, very robust consumption, strong investment, especially by European standards, and also very robust exports because it is very productive, very competitive. So at the wider economy level, Poland again is okay. Also, relatively speaking, the direct exposure to the US through tariffs is more limited than for many other economies due to the direct exposure of exports to the United States. Of course, there are many indirect impacts. Impact on sentiment, which we're beginning to see, is having a negative impact across Europe, including in Poland, both business confidence and consumer confidence. But it is relatively more insulated than other countries. Now, one reason when we look ahead why we are relatively optimistic is because of the health of the Polish consumer.
Polish consumer. We'll talk about Polish consumer, but I ask you about how does Poland compare to the other CEE countries and, for example, with Western Europe countries?
So both relative to the CEE peers, if we look at the performance of the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, the immediate neighbors, Poland has had stronger performance in terms of GDP growth, exports, investment. In terms of household consumption, Hungary has actually outperformed since the pandemic on the back of a massive fiscal stimulus that was put in place a couple of years ago, but it has outperformed the CEE peers. CEE in general, with the exception of Czech Republic, has also outperformed European peers. So again, when we look at performance relative to Germany, performance relative to even Eurozone average, Poland has outperformed. GDP growth, for example, again, if we look at since the pandemic, is GDP is some 14% larger than it was in 2019 compared to Eurozone average of 5%.
Okay, so let's go to the consumers. What are the most important shopping habits of Polish consumers today?
Well, let me maybe first talk about the consumer fundamentals just to set the scene of why Polish consumers are relatively resilient when it comes to shopping. So in terms of consumer fundamentals, that too has been quite strong. And this is actually a theme all across Europe. But again, I'll tell you in which ways Poland again stands out. So number one, labor markets remain really tight. Unemployment rates across Europe by historical standards are at the lowest level they've been in ages. Labor markets are softening. There's plateauing in generation of employment. There are fewer vacancies than what we have seen, say, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, but unemployment rates remain really low, which is a good place to be, especially as we're entering this uncertain period where tariffs could impact employment. That we're starting from this very tight labor market. Number two, real wage growth, meaning wage growth adjusted for inflation, has also been positive, not only on a year-on-year basis as it has been all across Europe, but when we look at cumulative growth in prices against cumulative growth in wages, Poland has recovered its purchasing power even relative to pre-pandemic levels, which is not the case with a lot of Eurozone countries, for example, like Germany or Italy, etc. And then thirdly, household balance sheets are healthy. Household debt has really decreased in recent years. The households have deleveraged. Poland has one of the lowest household debt to GDP ratios in Europe. So that too positions consumer well for spending. Having said that, despite these amazing fundamentals, consumption hasn't been as strong as one would expect given these fundamentals. And the reason is that consumers have been very cautious. I guess because of all the uncertainty we're dealing with, they have been saving higher proportion of their income than they typically do. So household savings rate in Poland right now is over 9%. Historically, before the pandemic, it was 6%. So you can see, instead of spending that higher purchasing power, consumers are saving higher proportion of it.
But in which areas are the biggest changes in behavior visible for consumers? For example, food, electronics, fashion. Where are the changes?
So there has been a big change since the pandemic, and especially in Poland. We have seen that during the period of high inflation, the Poles, like all other Europeans, have prioritized spending on essentials. Food, energy, because you have to buy these things to keep living, and prices of these things were very expensive. So spending on discretionary categories, be it furniture, apparel, experiences, was less than what we typically see. However, once inflation started to come down and we have seen discretionary spending expand, we have seen a huge rotation of consumer wallets towards spending on experiences. And that's more prominent in Poland than in many other European countries. Spending on things like travel, like going out to eat, live experiences, fitness experiences. It has really been consuming much of the share of consumer wallet, at the expense of spending less on material things like furniture, apparel, home improvement, electronics. So really a big rotation towards spending on experiences instead of spending on physical things.
And what is specific for Polish consumers?
Well, it's that real preference for experiences. Another thing where Polish consumers stand out, all across Europe we see that consumers are still very price sensitive. How can we say that? We look at spending within a category, let's say apparel, and we try to see, are they spending more on premium brands, or are they spending more on budget brands? And most Europeans are still preferring budget options when it comes to buying things. In Poland, consumers are increasingly less price sensitive, looking for those more premium options, whether it comes to travel, whether it comes to spending on apparel, whether it comes to treating themselves and spending more on jewelry as opposed to cosmetics, which are cheaper, or in the area of travel. So really that unwinding of price sensitivity is where Polish consumers stand out.
And let's talk about young people. What role do Generation Z and younger millennials play in shaping new consumer trends?
So every generation is different, right? And retailers are always interested what drives the current generation, because they'll be with us for the next 20, 40, 60 years, shaping the offering of the retailers. And I would say that the Gen Z generation is different in that they align their purchases and their spending to their values. They're very focused on things like environment, for example, sustainability. So that definitely enters the equation. But at the same time, because they're at the beginning of their careers, they're lower down on the income ladder, they're also one of the most price-sensitive consumers. So there's this tension between what they want to spend on, this more kind of the grander, aspirational purchases that align with their values, that usually come at a more premium price, versus what they can spend on, which is cheaper options which may not necessarily align with those values. So it's that constant tension, and I think from retailers' perspective, being able to address both the price and that sustainability angle is the winning formula.
And what is the future of consumer processes?
The future, I think, in general, the future is in experiences. Even when it comes to physical retail, we do see that consumers do value that personalization, that personal touch, the experiential side of it. So I think that shift we have experienced all during the pandemic, where we enjoy being with other people, making memories, living our lives, is translating into all kinds of spheres of life, including into just physical retail, where obviously experiences are shaping all that.
Thank you for interview. Moim gościem była pani Natalia Lechmanowa, Chief Economist Europe, Mastercard Economics Institute. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.